Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Mooney, and I want to thank you for joining me today. So if you're a subscriber to this channel, if you're not, please do subscribe. But if you are, you probably noticed that last week or so I did a big horror movie ranking. This was it wasn't the first. I actually did a review about this time last year. It was alright, whatever. But I've decided not to do the reviews. For the most part, what I want to do is the ranking videos. The ranking videos are a lot more fun. If there's 100 other people out there who've done video reviews and things like that, and all these movies that I'm looking at are classics anyway, or somewhat of a classic, depending. But yeah, these are what I want to do is instead of doing like what everybody else has done and ranking each individual franchise against itself. What's your favorite Friday the 13th movie? Well, whatever yours is, and then make the list down from there. What I actually want to do is compare across the franchises. This is why I'm calling this Franchise Wars, is because today's video we're going to talk about the original Friday the 13th, the original Halloween, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And then I'm going to rank them against each other. And then hopefully next week I'll be able to do the second ones. Just against the second ones, not against anything other than just the second installments from each franchise. So there's only going to be 4 movies in it. There's not going to be a whole lot of recap. Just going to give you kind of a brief why as to where I put them on the list. So this is Franchise Wars. This is episode 1. Let's get to it. Alright, so position number 4 on my list is A Nightmare on Elm Street. First of all, let me just say that all 4 of these movies are awesome movies. I love all 4 of these movies very much. But as far as my own personal preference, of these 4 movies, A Nightmare on Elm Street is the weakest entry. There's such good atmosphere for the first half of it. And then you get to that second act and it kind of drags a little bit. There's a lot of exposition. The alcoholic mother is brought in. It turns teen drama. It turns afternoon school break special there in the middle of it. And then when they go to do the sleep analysis, it just kind of drags through the middle. It has its moments. Rod's death and the things surrounding that are better moments than a lot of the second act, but it does kind of drag there. Then you get to the third act, and the only real mistake that this movie kind of makes is going against what it did for the first 2 acts. The first 2 acts, the Jaws theory, was intact. Use your villain sparingly, in the shadows, minimal use. That keeps, the mystery there. The third act, the whole battle between Nancy and Freddy. Freddy's on the screen way too much. I love Robert Englund as Freddy, but he runs goofy. He pops up from behind the bed and flops on it. Again, school break special. And then everybody's favorite moment in it where they pull the blow-up doll through the window. Glenn's death is definitely a high point in this. The dream chase sequence is a high point, but once it comes back out to the real world, that's of course not. It's just a dream like everything else. But spoiler, Freddy's just on the screen too much. The light bulb that explodes is nowhere near him. He might have picked up a little bit of the glass shrapnel, but that's not going to be anything but just annoying. To a human, let alone to a dream demon or whatever. So the last act kind of loses me a little bit. There's really high moments, but Freddy's just on screen too much for me on that one. And as much as I love this movie, and I would rate this movie an A+. It's definitely an A+ movie to me. It's just, of these four, it's the lesser movie. Alright, let's see what number 3 is. Alright, so number 3 on my list is John Carpenter's Halloween. I've told this story a few times, but I'm going to tell it again here so that you understand. I don't have a lot of nostalgia with the first 2 Halloweens. I was just getting into horror movies and things like that. And I had already seen Jason and several other horror movies at the time, Jaws and whatever else. Everybody that I knew who was into horror at the time kept telling me how much better the Halloween movies were than the other horror movies that I had seen. They were supposed to be, the pinnacle of the pinnacle. Well, Halloween 3 had just come out on videotape. I went and rented it, took it home and watched it, and I was thoroughly disappointed. So I didn't really watch the first 2 movies. I've said before, I didn't know who Michael Myers was. I just knew that Halloween was the best. So I didn't go into Halloween 3 expecting it to be a Michael Myers movie. I went into Halloween 3 expecting the best horror movie out there, and it wasn't. So I didn't really watch 1 and 2 until right before Halloween 4 came out. I just they were on the radar, I just didn't watch them. I knew that the first 2 were, by that point, I knew the first 2 were different than 3. I knew it was a slasher, and I liked the slasher genre. It's my favorite subgenre of horror, and it was then, and it still is now. But I just kept going, well, I'll watch those later. I'm going to go ahead and get the next Jason, or I'm going to go ahead and get the next Freddy, or I'm going to go ahead and get whatever else happened to be there. So I don't have a lot of nostalgia for these 2. So I see the little things in Halloween that the people who have all this super nostalgia for it don't really see. Jamie Lee Curtis is good in it. Donald Pleasance is great in it. Her 2 friends are pretty good. But the rest of the characters in the movie, the sheriff's not bad too. But the rest of the characters in the movie are low budget actors, is what they are. So yeah, I see their lack of acting. The movie's slow paced. It's a slow burner, and yeah. The scene at the beginning, the long shot where you see the mask go on the camera and he goes around through the house and up the stairs, wonderful. That's great. Most of the things about this movie are really awesome. I just don't have the nostalgia for it. I saw the others first, and the lack of a backstory bugs the piss out of me when it comes to this. I don't think it makes it more scary. I don't think it makes it, is he or isn't he supernatural? I don't see that. I'm just mostly bored with it. It's just the lack of gore really hurts it for me. It hurt it for me when I did see it. Of course, like I said, all of that said, this is an A+ level movie. All 4 of these movies are awesome. That's just my opinion on this one and why I ranked it as number 3. Now let's move on and see what's number 2. So number 2 on my list is Friday the 13th, the 1980 classic. I fully acknowledge that this is nostalgia points for me. This was the first slasher film that I ever saw. So, yeah, it's going to be higher for me because of that. This is the movie that made me fall in love with the slasher subgenre. So, a lot of people compare this one unfairly to Halloween, and Scott Cunningham's as much to blame for that as anything else, because he said in interviews that he went into this idea of doing a low-budget horror movie to rip off Halloween. But in later years, he's gone back and kind of and kind of retconned that. That's what I was looking for. And said that he wanted to rip off the success. There's very little, actually, if you really stop and think about it, in common between this story and Halloween. They both involve late teens, early 20s. They're both stalkers, but after that, there's a mystery to Friday the 13th that there's not to Halloween. We know who the killer is, or at least the audience does. The people there don't, but still, as far as the audience goes, we know it's Michael Myers. In this one, we don't find out who the actual killer is until the end. In Halloween, it's an urban setting. They're in town. They live in city blocks. Friday the 13th, it's more isolated, and it's a rural setting. They're out in the woods. You have the Harbinger of Doom cliche in this one that you didn't have in Halloween. Halloween has an Ahab. This one has a Harbinger. Both of those are different. So if you really look at it, Victor Miller, when he wrote this, was channeling Psycho a whole lot more than he was channeling Halloween. And it really is a reverse of Psycho. Excuse me. So the kills in it are Tom Savini, so you know they're gorgeous. The pacing on it does suffer at times, but the way that it's shot in first-person perspective, when you do have the kills, if it's somebody's back while they're doing things, like when, she's making popcorn, you don't know that perspective that you're seeing is the killer. You don't know if that's just the camera placement or if that's Crazy Ralph going to pop out. Spoiler alert. So, you don't know things like that. It's a different story enough, anyway, that it's more of a Psycho than it is a Halloween. And for me, it's number 2 on my list, so y'all know what that means. Alright, so number 1 on my list is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 1973, directed by Tobe Hooper, written by Tobe Hooper and Kim Hinkle. This movie really sets the stage for all the movies that have come after it, the 4 on this list and countless other ones that have come since then. It's what I call a foundation film. It really laid the groundwork. It really laid the foundation that Halloween built on, Friday the 13th built on, and infinite numbers of others have come afterwards. It's not a true slasher film in what we know it today, but it is the prototype for what would become the slasher film with Halloween. They took the grounded, down-to-earth elements and complete isolation elements from A Night of the Living Dead, as well as the toned-down, stripped-down, simplified human elements from Psycho, and they combined it with a story that was dual-layered. It was a reflection of, underneath it's a reflection of the times and the things that were going on and the view that these people had, and on the surface it's a straight up horror film. And like I said, the prototype slasher film. The big hulking antagonist, you have the rural setting, the city versus the country life, the modern versus the old ways. You even have a prototype for the Harbinger of Doom when they pull up to the gas station and they're told, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and of course they just ignore it like people their age do. All those things are set up in this movie. They weren't perfect in this movie, but it set them up. It went on to other movies that have refined them, in some cases dumbed them down, but still refined them and carried them forward from there. So, yeah, that's kind of my list, guys. There's a million things, a million reasons why Texas Chainsaw Massacre is number 1. The acting in it for people who had very minimal experience is really good. you kind of have to take the acting with a grain of salt. And of course, then the scene at the end of it where she's not acting, she's actually been driven to that point because of the horrific conditions that happened on set while trying to film for, depending on the source you read, 24 to 36 to 48 hours straight in 100-degree heat in a closed-off room with rotting food on the table. Enough to drive anybody mad, right? You know, all those things like that. Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt. It is an indie film. It's not even a low budget. It's a zero budget. It's a Roger Corman level budget that just went through the roof. Funny enough, the gore scenes in this one, I really like the way that they did them. Even though that's a positive for this movie, it's a negative for me on Halloween. The lack of gore in Halloween is one of those things that is a negative in my book, but the way that they do it in this one, the way that they imply it, really and truly makes your mind create it in a way that is actually probably better than what they could have done. Well, it's way better than what they could have done with the budget that they had. Even though some of the things that are in it are quite good. The grandpa makeup, considering their budget, is pretty good. You know, the meat hook scene, the famous meat hook scene, it's really good. That Mandela effect of that one, where people will swear up and down that there's cut footage where the hook is coming out the front of Pam's body. Things like that. All those little things like that are things that make this movie so good and laid the foundation for the other movies that came afterwards. And while it's not the one I'm going to watch the most, which is, I'm going to watch Friday the 13th before I watch the rest of these, but that's nostalgia on my part. And I fully admit that. But this movie is the one that I feel is the most important, and I also feel that it is the best. So, as I said, that's my list. Thank you guys so much for sticking around this long. As always, there's my advocacy links, my Teespring link, all of that stuff is down in the description below. If you haven't already, please give this a like. Please leave a comment. Let me know what order you would put these in and why. And if you haven't already, subscribe. I'd appreciate it very much. And like I always say, y'all be safe and have a good one.